Who brought my radar back from the dead? Rear Admiral Thomas Whitmore's voice cut across the Combat Information Center of the USS Resolute, and every sailor in the room stopped breathing. 42 faces turned toward him beneath the cold blue glow of tactical screens. 6 minutes earlier, those screens had been black. Now they pulsed with clean green tracks stretching nearly 200 miles across the Atlantic, each aircraft, ship, and weatherfront fixed in place with perfect clarity. The carrier could see again. Whitmore stood inside the hatch with his white cap tucked beneath one arm, his silver hair bright under the overhead lights. Behind him waited the captain, 3 senior officers, and a delegation flown in to observe the largest fleet defense exercise of the year. None of them spoke. The Admiral's eyes moved across the rows of consoles, past the exhausted technicians and open equipment panels, past coils of cable, scattered tools, and diagnostic tablets still displaying the same useless message. No fault detected. I asked a question, Whitmore said, quieter this time. Who fixed it? No sailor answered. They did something stranger. One by one, hands began to rise. A radar operator near the front pointed toward the rear bulkhead. Then a chief petty officer did the same. 2 technicians followed. Within seconds, every person in the room had turned and extended a finger toward the same man. Walter Mercer stood beside a gray cleaning cart near the far hatch. He was 78 years old, with white hair cut close around the ears and shoulders that had bowed slightly under the weight of time. His faded coveralls carried no rank, no ribbons, and no name beyond a small stitched patch that read Mercer. One hand rested on the wooden handle of a mop. The other held a dented leather tool pouch darkened by age and machine oil. A thin smear of dust crossed one sleeve. He looked less like the man who had restored the most important radar system in the carrier group than someone who had wandered into the wrong room while cleaning the passageway. The Admiral stared at him. The steady hum of cooling fans filled the silence. Somewhere beneath the deck, turbines sent a faint vibration through nearly 90,000 tons of steel. Walter felt it through the soles of his work boots. He had been listening to that vibration all morning. Whitmore's expression changed. Authority remained in his posture, but something older moved behind his eyes. Recognition, disbelief, memory. His gaze dropped to the worn brass clasp on Walter's tool pouch, then returned to the old man's face. Chief Mercer, he asked. Walter gave a small shake of his head. Not for a long time, Admiral. No one in the room understood why Whitmore suddenly looked as though a ghost had stepped out of the steel walls of his ship. 6 hours earlier, those same sailors had barely noticed Walter at all. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole had ordered him away from the radar consoles. 2 technicians had laughed at his tools. Someone had called him an old janitor who should stick to his mop. And when Walter quietly warned them that the system was lying, not one officer in the room had believed him. 6 hours earlier, the USS Resolute moved through a gray Atlantic morning at 24 knots, its flight deck shining beneath a thin layer of salt mist. Deep inside the ship, the Combat Information Center glowed with rows of blue and green screens. Voices stayed low. Keyboards clicked. Cooling fans pushed dry air through the crowded compartment. Outside, the carrier strike group spread across nearly 60 miles of ocean, preparing for a major air defense exercise scheduled to begin before noon. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole stood behind the central radar console with a tablet pressed against his palm. At 36, he had the sharp posture of a man who trusted preparation more than luck. His uniform was immaculate. His department had spent 3 weeks testing every sensor, cable, processor, and backup circuit aboard the carrier. Nothing had been left to chance. Then the primary long-range radar vanished. The main display flickered once. Every tracking symbol froze. A second later, the screen went black. A warning tone rolled through the room. Operators straightened in their chairs. Technicians reached for headsets. Cole stepped forward. Confirmed the failure. Petty. Officer Ryan Hayes ran a rapid system check. His fingers moved across the controls while lines of data filled the smaller screen beside him. Primary radar is offline, sir. The computer is not showing a source fault. Cole looked toward the backup station. Transfer tracking. The backup radar accepted the command, held for 12 seconds, then began dropping contacts one by one. Green symbols faded from the tactical display until the ocean around the carrier appeared empty. It was not empty. More than 30 aircraft were scheduled to enter the exercise area. Escort ships were waiting for targeting data. A civilian observation team was due aboard within hours. Rear Admiral Thomas Whitmore expected a flawless demonstration. Cole felt the weight of every expectation settle across his shoulders. "Run the diagnostic package again," he ordered. The technical team moved at once. Access panels opened. Test leads appeared. Software checks raced across portable screens. Power levels were normal. Cooling temperatures were normal. Signal processors reported normal. Every system insisted that nothing was wrong, while the carrier remained blind. Walter Mercer entered through the aft hatch pushing a gray cleaning cart. No one looked at him. To most of the crew, he was simply the elderly civilian who cleaned the passageways near the command spaces before the morning watch changed. He moved quietly, collecting paper cups and wiping a dark coffee stain from the deck near the rear bulkhead. Then he stopped. Beneath the alarms, the hurried voices, and the hum of ventilation, Walter heard a faint metallic tick. It came once, disappeared, then returned 3 seconds later. He lowered the mop handle and listened. A paper cup resting on the edge of his cart trembled in a pattern that did not match the vibration of the engines. Walter watched the coffee inside it form 2 sets of ripples. One moved with the ship, the other moved against it. His eyes shifted toward the steel wall marked with the number 14. At the same moment, a ceiling light dimmed for less than a second. A dry trace of ozone touched the air. Walter knew that smell. He had not smelled it in years, but memory did. "Not need permission to return. The problem is behind that panel," he said. His voice was low, almost lost beneath the activity. Ryan Hayes heard him and turned. Cole did too. The lieutenant commander stared across the compartment at the old man holding a mop. "What did you say?" Walter nodded toward the bulkhead. "Panel 14. Something behind it is breaking contact when the ship vibrates." Cole glanced at the diagnostic tablet, then back at Walter. That section passed every test. Walter watched the coffee tremble again. "Then the test is wrong." For a moment, Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole seemed unsure whether he had heard correctly. Then his expression tightened. Around him, technicians continued moving between consoles, but their attention had shifted toward the gray-haired civilian standing beside the cleaning cart. Walter Mercer did not repeat himself. He kept his eyes on panel 14, watching the steel surface tremble beneath the fluorescent light. Cole crossed the compartment in 6 measured steps. "Mr. Mercer, this is a restricted command space during an active systems failure. You are here to clean the deck, not diagnose naval equipment." Walter looked at the tablet in Cole's hand. Green status bars filled the screen from top to bottom. "Your equipment says the radar is healthy." Cole held the tablet higher. "Every power circuit, cooling unit, processor, and signal path has passed inspection. And yet you cannot see beyond the hull." A few sailors exchanged glances. One technician near the open equipment rack gave a quiet laugh. Cole heard it and allowed the sound to settle. "You were in the Navy once, correct?" he asked. "A long time ago. What did you do?" Walter returned his attention to the wall. "Electronics." Cole nodded as though the answer confirmed everything he already believed. Electronics. Before digital phased arrays, automated fault isolation, and modern signal processing. His voice carried across the compartment now. "These systems are not repaired by listening to the wall." Walter said nothing. Silence had always made impatient men speak more than they intended. Cole took a digital schematic from a technician and held it toward him. Hundreds of colored lines crossed the display. "Since you believe our diagnostics are wrong, show us the failure." Walter did not take the tablet. Instead, he stepped closer to panel 14 and placed 2 fingers against the steel. The ship rolled gently beneath them. A low vibration traveled through the bulkhead, followed by the faint metallic tick. Walter counted beneath his breath. 3 seconds. Tick. 3 seconds. Tick. Ryan Hayes watched from the radar console. The pattern matched the brief power fluctuations recorded during each restart attempt. He opened the maintenance log and scrolled backward. The interruptions were too short for the software to classify as a failure. Each one had been dismissed as harmless noise. "He may be hearing the relay cycle," Ryan said. Cole turned sharply. "Petty Officer Hayes, focus on your assigned station." "Yes, sir." Ryan faced the screen again, but his eyes remained on the data. A young technician noticed the worn leather pouch beneath Walter's cart and pulled it free with 2 fingers. "What is this, a museum exhibit?" He opened the flap and found old hand tools, each one polished by decades of use. Among them lay a narrow wrench with its edges ground into an unusual shape. You plan to fix the radar with this? Light laughter passed through the room. Walter reached out and calmly took the pouch back. His thumb rested on the worn brass clasp. For an instant, the cooling fans seemed to fade. The blue light disappeared. In its place came the memory of a black ocean, a rolling steel deck, and an entire formation waiting for one dead radar to breathe again. Then the present returned. Walter fastened the pouch and set it gently on the cart. That tool has repaired systems your manuals never mentioned. Cole pointed toward the aft hatch. Enough. Leave the compartment before I call security. Walter looked once more at panel 14. The overhead light dimmed. The coffee in the paper cup formed two opposing rings. You can remove me, he said quietly, but the fault will still be behind that wall. The order hung in the blue-lit compartment, but Walter Mercer did not move. He looked at Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole with the same calm expression he had worn from the beginning, and that stillness seemed to irritate Cole more than any argument could have. Around them, the technicians returned to their stations, though their attention remained fixed on the old man and the numbered panel behind him. Cole held out the digital schematic once more. You said the fault is behind that wall. Prove it. Walter glanced at the screen but made no attempt to take it. A diagram shows where the system was designed to work. It does not show what 40,000 miles of salt air and vibration have done to it. A technician named Mason Reed folded his arms. At 27, Reed was one of the youngest specialists in the department and one of the loudest. That radar array has continuous monitoring, thermal sensors, voltage tracking, and automated isolation. You are telling us all of that missed something you heard through a steel wall. Walter placed his fingertips against the panel again. Yes. Reed laughed. Several others joined him, though Ryan Hayes remained silent. Cole stepped aside and gestured toward the equipment racks. Very well. Explain the failure without touching anything. Walter studied the room. He watched the overhead lights, the cooling vents, and the subtle movement of loose paper near the floor. He listened as another restart sequence began. Deep inside the ship, power surged toward the radar. The steel around them answered with a low hum. For 2 seconds, the tone remained smooth. Then came the faint tick. The light above panel 14 dimmed. A diagnostic screen flashed yellow and immediately returned to green. Walter spoke without raising his voice. The signal path is opening under load. Not long enough to trigger your isolation system. Long enough to starve the transmitter. Reed shook his head. That is not possible. It is happening every 3 seconds. Ryan checked the maintenance trace. His eyes narrowed. There is a voltage dip at the same interval. Cole turned toward him. With intolerance. Barely, sir. Reed reached beneath the cleaning cart and lifted Walter's leather tool pouch before Walter could stop him. He opened it on a nearby console. Old screwdrivers, wire gauges, a burnishing strip, and the narrow hand-ground wrench rolled into the blue light. This is what you trust more than our equipment. Reed picked up the wrench and held it between 2 fingers. This looks like something made in a backyard shed. Walter extended his hand. Put it down. The laughter faded. His voice had not grown louder, but something in it had changed. Reed looked toward Cole, then placed the wrench into Walter's palm. The metal was cool and smooth where years of use had worn away every rough edge. Walter closed his fingers around it. The steady hum of the Combat Information Center receded. The clean air turned heavy with salt. The deck beneath his boots seemed to rise and fall. He was no longer 78, and the USS Resolute was no longer around him. He was 24 years old on a smaller ship in a black Atlantic storm, carrying that same wrench toward a radar room filled with darkness, while officers on the bridge waited for a screen that refused to come alive. The smaller ship rolled hard beneath Walter Mercer as the storm drove cold Atlantic water across the outer decks. He was 24 years old then, a chief electronics technician in everything but title, carrying a leather pouch in one hand and gripping the passageway rail with the other. The United States ship Hawthorne had lost its primary radar during a classified fleet exercise 300 miles east of Norfolk. Without it, the ship could not see the aircraft moving beyond the rain, and every vessel behind her was waiting for guidance that no longer came. Inside the radar room, red emergency lights washed the equipment in a dull glow. Fans labored against the heat. Gauges held steady. Test lamps remained green. 3 technicians stood around an open transmitter cabinet, each certain the failure had to be inside the power assembly. A young ensign named Thomas Whitmore watched from the doorway, his face pale beneath the red light. He had been sent down from the bridge with one message: restore the radar before the formation changed course. Walter set his pouch on the deck and listened. The ship climbed a wave, paused, then dropped into the trough. Somewhere behind the forward bulkhead came a faint metallic click. It repeated only when the bow fell to starboard. Walter asked the technicians to run the transmitter again. The machinery answered with a low rising hum. For 2 seconds, the power remained clean. Then the hull twisted against the sea, the click returned, and the signal vanished. The gauges still showed normal. One technician insisted the transmitter tube had failed. Another wanted to replace the entire control unit. Walter looked at a metal cup sitting near the bulkhead. Rainwater had collected inside it from a leak overhead. Each time the ship rolled, the water formed 2 crossing patterns. One followed the motion of the deck. The other trembled at a faster rhythm. Walter placed his hand against the wall and felt the second vibration beneath his palm. The fault is not in the cabinet, he said. No one believed him. He opened a narrow access plate and found a waveguide coupling hidden behind insulation. Salt moisture had crept into the joint, leaving a pale crust around one edge. The connection held while the ship was level. When the hull flexed, the coupling opened by less than the width of a fingernail. It was too brief for the instruments to record, but long enough to break the signal. The proper replacement part was locked in a storage compartment 2 decks below, and the officer with the key was trapped behind a jammed watertight door. Walter did not wait. He removed the narrow wrench from his pouch, the one he had ground by hand to fit places standard tools could not reach. Using a thin strip of copper and a piece of heat-resistant cloth, he tightened the coupling and braced it against the movement of the hull. Run it again, he told Whitmore. The young ensign relayed the order. Power surged through the system. The ship rolled. The coupling held. A green sweep crossed the radar display, revealing every aircraft and vessel hidden beyond the storm. No one cheered at first. They simply stared at the screen as if daylight had entered the room. Whitmore looked at Walter and asked how he had found what every instrument had missed. Walter closed his pouch. The machine was telling us, he said. We were listening to the wrong part. By morning, the story had spread through the ship. Sailors began calling him the signal ghost. Decades later, standing inside the United States ship Resolute, Walter opened his hand and saw the same worn wrench resting in his palm. The memory faded, but the lesson remained. Metal changed. Computers changed. The sea never did. Walter Mercer opened his eyes to the cold blue light of the Combat Information Center. The worn wrench remained in his hand. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole stood several feet away, waiting with the controlled impatience of a man who believed silence was another form of defiance. Well, Cole asked. Walter placed the wrench back inside the leather pouch and turned toward panel 14. The system is not failing while the ship is still. It is failing when the hull flexes. Cole frowned. This carrier displaces nearly 100,000 tons. The hull is engineered to handle movement. Engineered does not mean motionless. Walter pointed toward the diagnostic display. Your tests were run at the pier, during low-speed transit, or with the transmitter isolated. Right now, the ship is making 24 knots. That changes the load. Ryan Hayes studied the maintenance records on his console. He pulled up data from the previous week, then compared it with the current trace. The numbers looked normal until he overlaid the ship's speed and heading. A narrow pattern appeared. Each brief voltage dip happened as the carrier rolled into the northern swell. Sir, Ryan said. The interruptions matched the hull movement. Cole moved beside him. How close? Within half a second. Mason Reed leaned over the screen, his earlier amusement fading. That could still be coincidence. Walter stepped toward the bulkhead. Open the panel. Cole blocked his path. You do not have current authorization to work on this system. Then have someone who does open it. Cole looked toward Reed. Remove panel 14. Inspection only. Reed retrieved a powered driver and loosened the fasteners. The steel plate came away with a soft scrape, exposing insulated cables, cooling lines, and the rectangular waveguide that carried the radar signal through the ship. At first, nothing appeared wrong. The fittings were clean. The seals looked intact. Reed gave Walter a thin smile. No damage. Walter did not answer. He leaned close without touching the equipment and waited as the ship rolled. The hidden connection gave a tiny click. Ryan heard it this time. So did Reed. Walter pointed toward the lower coupling. There. Reed aimed a work light at the joint. Near the back edge, almost concealed beneath a mounting bracket, a pale line crossed the metal. Ryan crouched beside it. Fine salt crystals had gathered around a crack no wider than a strand of hair. Moisture intrusion, he said. Reed checked the handheld meter. Continuity is still good. Because the ship is level, Walter replied. He asked Ryan to place 2 fingers against the mounting frame while the transmitter entered another test cycle. Ryan felt a steady hum, then a sharp second vibration as the bow shifted. The coupling moved. Barely. The meter flickered and returned to normal before the software registered a fault. Ryan looked up. It separates under load. Cole stared at the crack. The certainty in his face had begun to erode, but procedure still held him upright. How long to replace the assembly? Reed checked the parts inventory. At least 4 hours, sir. Longer if the alignment is off. A warning tone sounded from the backup console. One of the remaining tracks disappeared from the tactical display. Then another. The operator turned in his chair. Lieutenant Commander, backup radar strength is dropping. Cole looked toward the clock. The exercise would begin in less than 20 minutes. Walter closed the flap on his pouch. You do not have 4 hours, he said. The warning tone sounded again, lower and more urgent than before. A third tracking symbol vanished from the backup display. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole looked from the failing screen to the cracked coupling behind panel 14. 4 hours had become impossible. 20 minutes had become 18. What is the temporary repair? He asked. Walter Mercer studied the exposed waveguide. The joint needs support, not replacement. Reduce the movement, restore alignment, and the signal should hold. Mason Reed shook his head. A field repair on a primary radar path is not authorized. Neither is leading a carrier group without reliable radar, Walter replied. Cole's jaw tightened. He understood both statements. Procedure protected the ship, but procedure also assumed there was time to follow it. The digital clock above the main display continued counting. 17 minutes. Ryan Hayes removed his access badge and stepped toward Walter. Tell me what you need. Cole turned. Petty Officer Hayes, stand down. Ryan stopped, but he did not put the badge away. Sir, he found the fault. We did not. The room became still. Ryan was young enough to fear what those words could cost him, but his voice remained steady. The replacement takes 4 hours. We have less than 20 minutes. Let him guide me. I am certified on the system. Walter looked at the badge, then at Ryan. Keep it. You will do the work. Ryan hesitated. You are not going to repair it. You have the authorization. I have the memory. That is enough. Walter opened the leather pouch and removed the narrow wrench, a burnishing strip, and a small piece of copper worn smooth at the edges. Reed stared at the copper. You carry spare metal in a cleaning cart? I carry things people throw away before they understand their value. Walter handed Ryan the work light and directed it toward the lower mounting bracket. He explained that the crack had allowed the coupling to shift only when the hull flexed. Tightening it harder would make the fracture worse. The joint needed a brace that could absorb vibration without changing the alignment. Ryan listened closely. Walter spoke in short, exact instructions. Loosen the rear fastener by 1/4 turn. Clean the salt from the contact edge. Do not touch the inner surface. Fold the copper once, not twice. Place it beneath the bracket where the movement began. Ryan's hands were careful, but the ship rolled and the wrench slipped against the fastener. He froze. Again, Walter said. There was no criticism in his voice. Feel the movement before you fight it. Ryan waited for the next roll. This time he turned with the motion of the hull. The fastener moved smoothly. Cole watched without speaking. The old janitor was not performing for the room. He was teaching a sailor to hear the ship through his fingertips. Reed monitored the signal trace as Ryan fitted the copper brace into place. Alignment is improving, he said, surprise replacing doubt. Another warning appeared on the backup console. Only half the exercise contacts remained visible. 14 minutes. Walter inspected Ryan's work, then nodded once. Secure the bracket. Ryan tightened the fastener until Walter raised one finger. Stop there. More pressure will bend the guide. Ryan released the wrench. The coupling no longer shifted when the ship rolled. Cole looked toward the central console. Can it carry full power? Walter closed the pouch. There is only one way to know. Cole drew a slow breath and faced the operators. Prepare to restart the primary radar. Across the compartment, hands moved to controls. Cooling fans rose in pitch. The lights dimmed as power gathered beneath the deck. Every sailor watched the black display, waiting to learn whether they had restored the carrier's sight or spent their final minutes trusting an old man with a mop. Power moved through the primary radar in a rising mechanical hum, deep enough to be felt through the deck before it could be heard. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole stood behind the central console with both hands locked against the rail. Ryan Hayes remained beside panel 14, the narrow wrench still warm in his palm. Walter Mercer watched the exposed coupling, not the display. He had learned long ago that a screen only showed the end of a story. The truth began inside the metal. Transmitter power at 20%, Mason Reed reported. The overhead lights dimmed. Cooling fans accelerated. A faint vibration passed through the bulkhead. Walter placed 2 fingers against the mounting frame. The copper brace held. 40%. The ship rolled gently toward starboard. Every sailor waited for the metallic tick. It did not come. 60%. A pale line appeared across the main display, then vanished. Cole leaned closer. Signal status? The operator checked his instruments. No return yet, sir. 8 minutes remained before the exercise aircraft entered the outer defense zone. Walter closed his eyes and listened. The radar was drawing power, but the tone was uneven, as though the system were trying to breathe through a narrow opening. Hold at 60, he said. Cole looked at him. Why? The coupling is aligned, but the load is settling against the brace. Give it 3 seconds. Cole hesitated, then raised one hand. Hold power. 1 second passed. The room seemed to contract around the black screen. 2 seconds. Ryan felt the wrench tighten in his grip. 3 seconds. Nothing changed. Reed looked toward Walter. The repair did not work. Cole's face hardened. Shut it down. Wait, Walter said. A softer tone had appeared beneath the cooling fans, almost too low to notice. It traveled through the wall, steady and clean. Walter knew that sound. Increased to full power. Cole stared at the dark display. The decision belonged to him, and everyone in the compartment knew it. Finally, he turned toward the operator. Take it to full. Power surged. The deck vibrated. The cracked coupling remained still. A green line swept across the main screen. Once. Twice. On the third sweep, a single tracking symbol appeared 60 miles east of the carrier. Then another formed beside it. Within seconds, the display filled with aircraft, escort ships, weather cells, and identification markers. The ocean returned in layers of light. Primary radar is stable, the operator said, disbelief lifting his voice. Signal strength at 100%. Reed checked the diagnostic trace again. Every reading held steady. Ryan slowly lowered the wrench. No one cheered. The room was too stunned for noise. Sailors who had laughed at Walter now looked at him as though they were seeing him for the first time. Cole turned from the restored display to the old man beside the cleaning cart. His confidence had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. How long will it hold, he asked. Walter watched the clean sweep cross the screen. Long enough to finish the exercise. Replace the assembly when the sea is calm. A voice came through. The command circuit. Rear Admiral Thomas Whitmore was on his way to the Combat Information Center. Walter placed the wrench inside the leather pouch and closed the brass clasp. Ryan stepped closer. Mr. Mercer, who taught you to hear a ship like that? Walter rested one hand on the mop handle. The ships did. The aft hatch opened, and the room straightened as one. Rear Admiral Thomas Whitmore entered the Combat Information Center with the carrier captain and 3 senior officers behind him. Every sailor came to attention, but Whitmore barely noticed. His eyes went first to the main display, where clean green tracks moved across nearly 200 miles of ocean. The exercise aircraft were visible again. Escort ships had regained their picture. The carrier was no longer blind. Whitmore studied the screen for several seconds, then faced the room. Which one of you restored the system? No one answered. Ryan Hayes looked toward Walter Mercer. Mason Reed followed his gaze. Then, one by one, every sailor in the compartment turned and pointed toward the old man beside the cleaning cart. Walter stood with one hand on the mop handle and the other resting near the worn leather pouch. Whitmore stared at him. The authority in his face gave way to something quieter. His eyes moved to the brass clasp on the pouch, then to the narrow wrench visible beneath the flap. Chief Mercer, he asked. Walter gave a small shake of his head. Not for a long time, Admiral. Whitmore crossed the room slowly. United States Ship Hawthorne. North Atlantic Exercise. 1972. The compartment fell silent. Walter said nothing. Whitmore stopped in front of him. We lost the radar in a storm. The bridge believed the transmitter was finished. You found a cracked waveguide coupling behind a bulkhead and kept the entire formation from changing course blind. He looked around at the sailors. I was a 23-year-old ensign standing in that radar room. I watched this man hear a failure that every instrument had missed. Cole lowered his eyes. The confidence he had worn all morning had become a burden. Admiral, I ordered Mr. Mercer out of the compartment. I dismissed his assessment and allowed members of my team to treat him without respect. The responsibility is mine. Walter looked at him without anger. Your responsibility is the ship. Next time, protect it by listening before you decide who is worth hearing. Cole met his gaze and nodded. Yes, sir. Whitmore glanced at the restored display. How permanent is the repair? Ryan answered. It will hold through the exercise, Admiral. We will replace the assembly when conditions allow. Whitmore looked back at Walter. You trained him? He did the work, Walter said. I only showed him where to listen. Ryan still held the narrow wrench. He tried to return it, but Walter closed the young sailor's fingers around the handle. Keep it until the new coupling is installed. Ryan looked down at the old tool. What if I need it again? Walter lifted the leather pouch onto the cleaning cart. Then you will know why it was made. Whitmore extended his hand. Walter accepted it, and the Admiral covered the old veteran's hand with both of his. No salute was necessary. The respect in the room was heavier than ceremony. When Walter turned toward the hatch, the sailors moved aside without being told. Hours earlier, he had passed through the same compartment like part of the furniture. Now every face followed him. Cole stepped back first. Reed removed his cap. Ryan stood straight with the wrench held carefully at his side. Walter pushed the cleaning cart into the passageway, where the steady vibration of the carrier traveled through the deck beneath his boots. Behind him, the radar continued its measured sweep. Machines remembered data. Sailors remembered the people who brought them home.